Okay, this is probably going to be a short-ish video, although it may turn out that an hour from now I'm realizing that I'm still going. But what I wanted to talk about today is a few tips for making life in Krita a little easier and maybe more reliable. So the first tip I am going to throw out there is as follows. Actually, let me hit undo here on my project. So, okay. So these are practical problems that I've bumped into that you're looking for ways to solve. We have a situation here where I just went in and repurposed this shot, which was derived from this one. Okay. This is the old version of the shot, which sucks a bit. Okay, so I wanted to take this, apply a little bit of rule of thirds, move the ninjas in closer, close up the focal distance, but yet turn on some focal blur. So if you're wondering about that, I will tell you that the blur filter, lens blur in Krita is quite good. It allows you to emulate camera bokeh quite well, so it's going to be a more convincing focal blur than what you're going to get from, say, a Gaussian blur, that sort of thing. Okay, so the problem that I'm wanting to solve right now has to do with lip sync. Or, I'm sorry, actually I already did the lip sync. It has to do with expressions. Now, I want to always give the caveat that Krita may in fact blow up in the process of doing this. But let's give it a crack. So the problem that we have is that I want to take my ink and my fill layers, and I want to add a keyframe downstream here a little bit. Right now, in the neighborhood of this, he says, by the way, who is this Zen? Okay, right around here, I want to have him give a bit of a squinty look. So I want to do it with a deformation. I don't want to redraw it. I'm mainly because I'm not even sure that I'm going to want this animation in there, but I want to stick it in there, kind of see how it goes. So the problem is that if I use the deformation tool, say liquify, on one layer or the other, then obviously there's no way, especially if I grab this one, you see that Krita brings it to the front, so you can deform it, which is kind of cool in a way, but the problem is there's basically no way that you're ever going to get these both to be deformed in synchronization. So what's the solution? The solution is grab the two, and in fact I'm going to grab the shadow layer as well. Let me see if there's anything in the highlights. And the highlights is going to affect his hair. Okay. Okay. So this is already grouped, as you can see. All right. So the problem we're going to have here is that the mouth really needs to not be part of the group. Okay. So what the idea that I'm going for here is that I want to hit Control G and put these layers in a group. Okay. And we'll just call this Mr. Big Grouped. And then turn on this little icon right here, which is pass-thru. What that means is that if I do any deformation to the group layer, it's going to go ahead and insert keys in all of these. Okay. So now I can do this somewhat subtle deformation action. All right, let's give that a crack. Who is this Zen? Okay. Okay, and on the word is, I'm going to do the opposite. I want to kind of play the idea that he's feigning concern. Okay. By the way, who is this Zen? Okay. All right, that happened a little too late, as far as I'm concerned. He's not the bird. Okay. Wait. Yeah, it's on the word burly. So these right here need to be right around 92, I think. And then one could argue that as a transitional here, that might be useful. Let me see. Yeah, I'm going to do the same thing here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the same deformation, just a little less extreme. Just something to get me from here to there. Okay, and then on this one, I think, come on baby, one problem you're going to have is that you can't toggle between keyframes on the group layer, which is kind of a bummer, but not the end of the world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just recompensate for that a little bit here. And now let's just see. I like that. Yes. So another tip, I sort of stumbled against my will into a second tip, which is if you're going to go and go from here to here, and you're not necessarily going for, in other words, you're going from this expression to this expression, or whatever the transition might be. What I find is a lot of times to just go 2 frames in front of it and put a simple tween is often extremely helpful to just smooth things out. Okay? Now, I'm not saying this is definitively amazingly great, but it is pretty much what I was looking for. Okay, so let's see how it plays. Who is this Zen? He's not the burly one. Okay, now I'm going to go to his mouth, and let me see here. The only problem I have with this and by the way, these keyframes all need to be deleted. They're holdovers from the scene that I derived this from. Remember, save early, save often. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 2 keys and move them downstream. And I'm just going to look for the teeth one. Okay, there's the teeth. I'm going to put that there, and then this is just kind of the neutral expression, if you will. I'm going to make a copy of that here. Hello. And then I'm going to grab, I'm hitting the Alt key so that it ripple edits these. Okay, and actually, if I'm going back to this, then it actually almost makes sense that I would take these 2 sets of keys and put these here again, just to see if that okay. Alright, I don't like this. I feel like that's a little too extreme. Let me see what this looks like. Okay, not horrible. I'm gonna this little icon here is how you can change the scale of the timeline, by the way, and obviously those keys need to be gotten rid of. Who is this Zen? He's not the burly one. Okay, yeah, the only problem I would say is that these keys are too extreme. So I've got the hotkey set up, Control Shift X. For me, deletes keyframes. So I can just grab a cluster of keyframes and just instantly get rid of them, which is right here, remove keyframe. So it's something that has proven to be fairly useful at many times. So oh, that's not bad. I actually like that better. By the way, who is this Zen? He's not the burly one. Okay, the only thing I'm thinking here, so yeah, unfortunately you guys, we're getting a mix of friendly tips and actually trying to get some work done here. So okay, that's not bad. I'm gonna go with that. Okay, other tips I wanted to bring up. And to demonstrate this, I'm gonna just create a clean seam. All right, so there we go. All right, and just to make it simple, I'm gonna draw a simple shape, and I'm gonna fill it. And in this case, I'm gonna fill it in behind mode so that it's all on one layer. Okay, one of the things that I was pondering is camera moves and transparency. Now, Krita has, if you look at the animation Docker, I guess it's called, Krita has the ability to create an opacity keyframe. Okay, and what that allows you to do is one thing, the only thing actually in Krita that you can animate in a way that the changes are interpolated over time is opacity. Go ahead and use the opacity keyframes if you want to. Personally, I'm not interested. And the reason I'm not interested is because what I've found is it's only reliable in the very simplest scenes. Now, in a sense, that can be okay. So I guess I'll go ahead and demonstrate it, just because it could be okay in the sense that you could take this element, create opacity keyframes over time, render it out as like an image sequence of pings or TIFFs, and then bring those back into a more complex Krita project, or bring them into Blender or OpenTunes or whatever else you want to use. So as long as you keep it really small and simple, you can do it. So I could go add opacity keyframe here. Now, it's a little non-intuitive, because what it did was it set the opacity to 0. Okay, which to me is a little bit silly, but I'm on frame 0, so I'm going to go ahead and create the opacity keyframe, but change the opacity afterwards. So then you go up here and you say, okay, give me another opacity keyframe. Boom, it sets it to 0. All right, and now it does exactly as you would expect. So if you want to just use opacity keyframes and test your luck, go for it. It's not the worst thing you could do. Removing opacity keyframes appears to me to be a little bit hit and miss. My Control-Shift-X does not work. How you go in there and let me try remove frame and pull and see if that does the trick. That kind of sort of does the trick. Actually, I think it did. So remove frame and pull seems to do the trick, and now I go ahead and set the opacity back up to... Okay. So what was the point as far as a quick tip? Well, what you could do is, this is sort of the argument. The argument is, if I'm going to keyframe opacity over time in any other application, I'm probably going to add some sort of plugin, or I'm going to add some keyframes. And if you're in Blender, for example, then you now have the problem of mixing, say, grease pencil keyframes with standard dope sheet keyframes. The point is that there's some housekeeping required to dance around the application in order to get to what you want to get to. In many cases, keeping things as flat and simple and clean as possible, and hard-coded, if you will, is not a bad thing. So what if you wanted to go ahead and fade this layer out over time, but you knew in advance that you were going to do that fade over the course of 1 second, which in my case is 24 frames. Well, here's an interesting way to do it. What I'm going to do is add a filter, which is going to be a hue saturation value adjustment. Okay, but I'm going to switch it to, which one was it? Hue, saturation, luma, lightness, intensity. No, bear with me, folks. I saw this just a couple days ago, and oh, I know what it was. I think this is the wrong. Let me double check this. Adjust cross-channel adjustment curves. Yes. And what I used was alpha. Okay. And then what I did was said, let's go ahead and lower the alpha this much. Okay? Now what's kind of interesting about that is if I insert a keyframe right here and now go 2 frames ahead, I can just hit Control F and it's going to keep repeating that same filter. So I've accomplished the same thing, but the fade is now hard-coded into the layer. Okay. Now, advantages, disadvantages. The advantage is that you could actually keyframe this on 2s, as I've done here, instead of 1s, because if you do standard interpolation, it's interpolating on 1s. The big disadvantage is, what if we now say, well, we also want to move this layer? Let's say we're going to do a camera move or something. That's where it gets a little more complicated, unfortunately, because I'm going to go ahead and hit a group here, and again, I'm going to click this so that any animation that I do to this will pass through to the layer below. The problem you're going to have is, let's say we change the size here. The problem is it keeps switching back, right? Okay, so what that tells you is that, generally speaking, you want to think about the order in which you do things, because in this case, if I had done the translation first and animated that, and then go back and add the filter, then I could still fade it out over time, as you would intend to do. So how do we solve that? Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and move this up here, get rid of that, and I'm actually just going to select all this and hit Control-Shift-X and get rid of the keyframes. Okay. So now, let's say we want to do a camera move. The camera's going to push in. Okay, and we're going to kind of learn this here together, folks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's scale it, and let's lock these, and we're going to go 110%. Okay. Now, the only problem here is that it keeps switching back to 100%. So there's, again, there's a little bit of housekeeping involved if we're going to do let's say, a predictable camera move kind of situation here. Okay, I didn't mean to do that. 110. Okay, so I go 2 frames ahead. So again, you might complain here. You say, well, that takes a lot of time having to go ahead and manually keyframe all these things. Okay, and by the way, you can see the mistake I made. I forgot to lock the parameters. So, in other words, to program a camera move into this shot, I would want to go click, click, 110. Now, I would like to suggest maybe to the developers of Krita that putting number one, having the settings be retained between uses would be very, very helpful. And number two, to be able to put plus 10% or put plus or minus here would also be quite useful. So, but there it is. So I go 2 frames ahead, lock that. Okay, so yeah, it doesn't do me any good, unfortunately, to once I invoke the tool. Well, let me see what happens if I just hit the A key. Yeah, I have to click it though, is the problem. And when I click it, I then have to go like this. So the point is really that you can do a fairly predictable camera move situation in Krita if you plan ahead, like so. Alright, so in other words, by doing it numerically, you can do it free transform, like so, but I find that it's really difficult to create tweens that are actually predictable. It's really hard to do it as exactly as you need to. You see that right there it hesitated. Okay, that's because it's still scaling up, but it wasn't a uniform. So as long as it was uniform, 10% each time, it looked great. And then you get to whatever it is here, that keyframe, and not quite right. Okay, so now let's say this thing's getting closer to us, and we want to do what we did before, but instead of doing the alpha transform or the transparency, let's say we want to do a focal thing. So in other words, as the thing gets closer to us, it's going to go out of focus. How would we do that? Well, you kind of use the same concept as before. What I would do is I'd go blur, lens blur, and I'm going to say, let's go to, I want to do just enough so I can kind of see it happening. Okay, so that's not too bad. But of course, I want to start it maybe here. So filter, blur, lens blur. Okay. And let's go 10%. Okay. Now, if you really want to do this right, this is how you do it. You'd go ahead and add this adjustment here, 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 here. And then you come back here to the first one where it's filtered, and then go to the second one, repeat again. So you see every time I hit Control F, it's just adding a little bit more defocusing, and the result is exactly as we would want. Okay, and now what we can do is, if you want to add your transparency thing over top of that, then you'd go adjust, cross channel. We're going for alpha. So again, what I want to say is that there's an extent to which you say, well, Dave, that's very clunky. That's very clunky. We're having to do everything sort of the hard way. One little teeny weeny step at a time. Okay? And to which I say, you're correct. So now what's happening is, because there's no animation keyframes already baked into this, every time I hit Control F, it's just adding 10% more transparency to what was already there. Okay? What is my point? My point is that what I've been finding is that by doing it this way, doing it the slow way, is actually just as fast, if not faster, than doing it the fast way. This meticulous process of really planning out the timing of what you're wanting to do, in my experience over the past year since I've been doing this sort of anime thing on YouTube, is that basically that's a good thing. It forces you to be careful. It forces you to be thoughtful about what you intend to do. When the fancy schmancy tools are too capable, you are it's just really easy to depend on the tools to do your work for you, and it makes you lazy. I don't know how else to explain that. And so that's why, if you look at what I was doing, a few months ago in OpenTunes, it's not horrible, but it's not exactly where it needs to be either. Whereas the work that I've been doing lately, I think it's safe to say, which I've been doing very much more, keyframe by keyframe in Krita, looks better, feels better, is more, let's say, professional. Of course, this camera move was done in Blender. I created the elements in Krita, but then mapped it to a plane in Blender and did the camera move that way. But this is probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned doing anime, is the slow way is the fast way. It's really true. And I've heard other people say it, and I haven't really believed it, but it really is true. The fast way is the slow way. That right there looks fine. That looks great. It's perfectly usable. And what did it take? It took, if I hadn't been blabbing while I did it, it would have taken less than 5 minutes to create that. The point is not about whether the tools can ostensibly speed something up for you, but the question is whether you've planned well and know what you intend to do. That's my opinion. Others may differ, but and it's kind of exciting in a way, because what it means is pretty much anything you want to do, you're going to be able to find a way to do it in Krita. Well, the truth is you're also going to be able to find a way to do it in the Blender Grease Pencil or OpenTunes or whatever tool you're using. So for me, I just happen to be using Krita lately because I just enjoy it. I like the painterly, I like its capabilities as a paint program. And the more I do this sort of real meticulous approach to animation, the more I'm actually finding I enjoy the work, which at the end of the day is by far the most important thing. Because if you don't enjoy the work, screw it, you're not going to do it. You're going to give up, you're going to quit, go find something else to do, right? So with that, I think I'm going to wrap on that. I think it's been a good session. I'm not going to put this in the anime creation playlist. I'm just going to put it out there as Krita tips. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been helpful to you. If you're trying to do frame by frame animation, I do hope that you find this kind of maybe opens some windows and allows you to do more of what you want to do. I don't see any advantage at this point in any other software. I don't see any advantage in TV Paint. I don't see any advantage in Clip Studio. Not at all. I see no advantage. I feel that I've realized that the weak link in the chain is always me. It's never the tools, and that's the takeaway today. And so if you recognize that and you buy into it, then you begin to work microscopically and look at frame by frame. What do I really intend to do? And you start, as I say, take responsibility. If it sucks, it's your fault. It's my fault. It's not good enough. That's why I'm going through here and I'm redoing practically every shot in the show. It's being redone. And you know what? I don't care. It's fun. It's cool. And the final result looks better than what I had before. So I'm cool with it. I'm looking forward to getting to being able to do the soundtrack and get some voices on here and that sort of thing too. So it's all good. And again, with that, I am going to wrap. It's been about a half hour. And again, I hope you guys found it helpful. And I suppose the next time I come back, we will have this shot rendered. This shot, obviously, and cut into the show. And by the way, the last video I did was this shot. And I had done the pencils. And I actually did a video. I don't remember what went haywire, but something went haywire when I was doing the video with the ink work, and I just shut OBS off and said, I just need to get the work done. The videos may be less important. So this shot was actually done in I think my last YouTube video. I did the pencil test, and then I kind of did the ink and paint without you guys. So sorry about that. But we'll get back on track here shortly. So, and with that, there will be more later.